Sometimes in the middle of thousands of words scrolling on the screen, one single comment appears that makes you stop. Your finger freezes, your heart pauses for a second, and suddenly that comment feels different from all the others. Today, that happened to me. I was just reading comments like I always do, but then I saw your comment, and I don't know why, but something about it felt real, honest, almost like it was speaking directly to me. Out of millions of people in this world, somehow your words reached me, not just my eyes, but my heart. And since that moment, I couldn't ignore it, because sometimes a simple comment is not just a message. Sometimes it's the beginning of a story you never expected. So if you're the one who wrote that comment, this message is for you. I was scrolling the way we all do these days, quietly, casually, letting the world pass by on a small glowing screen in my hand, thousands of voices moving past my eyes like waves in an endless ocean. Comments, thoughts, jokes, questions, people speaking into the void hoping someone might listen. Most of them I read and forget in the same second. That's the rhythm of the internet. Fast, loud, temporary. But then something unusual happened. My thumb stopped moving. But then something unusual happened. Right there, between all those voices, I saw your comment. I don't know what it was at first. Maybe it was the words. Maybe it was the feeling behind them. Or maybe it was just the strange way life works sometimes, where one small moment suddenly feels bigger than it should. Your comment wasn't loud. It wasn't trying to be the most clever or the most dramatic. It was simple, honest, almost quiet in a place where everyone is trying to shout. And somehow that quietness made it stand out more than anything else. So I read it again, and then I read it one more time. It's funny how a few words written by someone you've never met can create a strange kind of pause inside your mind. The world keeps moving. Notifications keep appearing. People keep typing. But for a moment you just sit there thinking about that one message. Your message. I started wondering about the person behind those words. Who were you when you typed that comment? Where were you sitting? Was it late at night for you? Or early morning when the world is still calm and quiet? Were you smiling when you wrote it? Or were you just thinking out loud without realizing someone might feel something when they read it? Because I did feel something. Not in a dramatic way. It's not like some movie scene with music in the background, just a small shift inside my chest. The kind of feeling that makes you curious. The kind that makes you slow down for a second in a world that usually moves too fast. It made me realize something strange about this place we all share online. Millions of strangers passing each other every second. Most of us invisible to each other. Just usernames and profile pictures floating in a digital crowd. But every once in a while, someone steps out of that crowd without even trying. You did. And maybe you didn't even know it. Maybe to you, it was just a quick thought you decided to leave under a video. Something small. Something forgettable. Maybe you typed it and moved on with your day, never imagining that somewhere out there someone would stop and think about it longer than expected. But that's exactly what happened, because your comment felt real. And real things are rare in a place built on speed and noise. So I stayed there for a moment, looking at those words, imagining the person behind them. Not in a perfect way. Not like some fantasy version of who you might be. Just a normal human being somewhere in the world breathing. Thinking, living a life full of ordinary moments just like mine. Maybe you were tired that day. Maybe you were bored. Maybe you were curious. Maybe you were just being yourself. For a second in a place where most people pretend to be something else. And somehow that honesty traveled through the screen. Straight to me. It's strange, isn't it? How two strangers can share a moment without ever meeting. No introductions. No conversation. Just a few words. Appearing in the right place at the right time. I kept thinking about that after I closed the app, because moments like that remind me that behind every comment section, behind every username, there are real people, real lives. War. Real thoughts. People who laugh, people who worry, people who are trying to figure things out just like everyone else. And sometimes one of those people leaves a comment that feels different. Not louder, just clearer. like a voice that doesn't need to shout to be heard. When I saw your comment, it felt like that. Not like noise, more like a small signal in the middle of a crowded world. A reminder that even in a place filled with strangers, sometimes a few simple words can travel farther than expected. Farther than the person who wrote them ever imagined. Farther than logic can explain. And maybe that's what caught my attention the most. The mystery of it. Candace, and maybe that's what caught my attention the most. The mystery of it. The idea that somewhere out there, someone wrote something without knowing it would land exactly where it needed to land, without knowing that another person would read it slowly, think about it, and wonder about the story behind it. Because every comment has a story behind it. A moment. About the story behind it. A moment. A thought. A feeling. And when I saw yours, I realized I wanted to understand that story just a little more. Not in a complicated way. Just in the quiet, human way where curiosity meets connection for a brief second in time, where a stranger's words stop another stranger from scrolling, where a all message becomes something more than just text on a screen, where one comment quietly changes the rhythm of an ordinary moment. Sometimes the most interesting people in our lives begin as complete strangers. No history, no shared memories, no long conversations that build the connection step by step. Just a single moment where two paths cross unexpectedly, and suddenly a stranger feels strangely familiar. That's the feeling I had after I saw your comment. I didn't know your voice. I didn't know your story. I didn't know what kind of day you were having when you decided to write those words. But something about the way you expressed yourself carried a feeling that was difficult to ignore. That it wasn't just the message, it was the honesty behind it. In a world where so many people try to sound perfect, try to impress everyone, try to be louder than the next person, your words felt simple, real, human. And sometimes that kind of simplicity is what stands out the most. Because real words have weight. They travel differently. When I read your comment again, I started thinking about how strange this world is. Millions of people moving around every day, each one living their own life, dealing with their own struggles, chasing their own dreams. Most of them will never meet each other. Most of them will pass by without even noticing. But sometimes, two people notice each other for a second. Not because they planned to. Not because they were searching. Just because something small created a spark of recognition. That's what your comment felt like. Recognition. Like hearing a voice in a crowded room that somehow sounds familiar, even though you've never heard it before. Like walking past someone on the street and feeling, for a brief second, that you understand something about them without needing an explanation. It's hard to describe that feeling, but it's real. Maybe it's the way. Maybe it's the way you chose your words. Maybe it's the emotion hidden between the lines. Maybe it's just the strange timing of life placing two strangers in the same moment. Whatever it was, it made me stop and think about you. Not in a way that feels forced or dramatic. Just in a quiet way. The kind of curiosity that appears naturally when something genuine enters your day. I wondered who you are when you're not typing comments online. Are you someone who likes silence? The kind of person who enjoys calm evenings and long thoughts? Or are you someone who laughs loudly with friends and fills the room with energy? Maybe you're the type of person who overthinks everything. Someone who notices small details that others ignore. Someone who feels things deeply, but doesn't always say it out loud. Or maybe you're the complete opposite. Maybe you're simple, direct, someone who says exactly what they mean without worrying too much about how it sounds. The truth is, I don't know. And that mystery is part of what makes the moment interesting. Because sometimes the people we know the least can still leave an impression that feels unexpectedly strong. A stranger can say something that echoes in your mind longer than the words of people you see every day. That's the strange beauty of human connection. It doesn't always follow rules. Sometimes it appears quietly, through something as small as a comment written by someone you've never met. And when that happens, the The distance between strangers suddenly feels smaller. For a brief moment, the world doesn't feel so big anymore. It feels like two people accidentally sharing the same thought at the same time, even if they're miles apart, even if their lives are completely different. And maybe that's why your comment stayed in my mind. Because in that moment, you didn't feel like just another stranger passing through a screen. You felt like someone real. Thoughtful. Someone whose words carried a small piece of their personality with them. And even though we've never met, even though we may never know each other's full stories, that tiny moment of recognition still exists. A reminder that sometimes familiarity doesn't come from years of knowing someone. Sometimes it comes from one honest sentence, written at the right time by the right person, a stranger who somehow feels familiar. There's something interesting about silence between two people who have never spoken. Not the empty kind of silence, but the quiet space where something unspoken exists. A space where words haven't been exchanged yet, but somehow a connection still feels possible. After I saw your comment, that quiet space started to exist. We didn't have a conversation. You didn't know I was reading your words slowly. You didn't know that someone paused because of what you wrote. But even without that conversation, there was still a small thread connecting the moment you typed those words and the moment I read them. It's a strange kind of connection, invisible. Quiet, but real enough to make someone think. The world today is louder than it has ever been. Everyone is speaking at the same time. Everyone is sharing opinions, stories, emotions, trying to be seen, trying to be heard. And in all that noise, most messages disappear almost instantly. But every now and then, one message doesn't disappear. It stays. Not because it was the loudest or the most dramatic, but because it carried something honest inside it. Your comment felt like that. Like a small signal traveling through all the noise. And the strange part is, you probably had no idea. Maybe, when you wrote it, you were just being yourself for a moment. No performance. No expectations. Just a simple thought you decided to leave behind before moving on with your day. But sometimes the simplest things travel the farthest. Sometimes a quiet message reaches someone who happens to be listening at the exact right moment. And that's where connection begins. Not with grand speeches or perfect words, just with a moment of recognition. I started thinking about how many times something like this happens every day without anyone noticing. People crossing paths in small ways. A comment, a smile, a sentence, a glance. Tiny moments that connect two lives for a second before they continue moving in different directions. Most of the time we forget those moments, but sometimes we don't. Sometimes something about the moment feels meaningful. Not in a dramatic or romantic way, just in a human way. It's a kind of meaning that reminds you that the world is full of people who are more similar than we realize. People who feel things, people who think deeply, people who are searching for understanding in their own quiet way. And maybe that's what your comment carried. A feeling that didn't need explanation. A thought that didn't need decoration. Just honesty. And honesty creates a different kind of connection. It doesn't force anything. It doesn't demand attention. It simply exists, waiting for someone to recognize it. When I read your words, it felt like recognizing something familiar in someone I've never met. Not your face, not your voice, just your presence behind the words. That quiet presence stayed with me longer than I expected, because the truth is, connection doesn't always require two people speaking at the same time. Sometimes one person writes something and another person understands it in silence. Sometimes the connection lives in that quiet understanding, a space where nothing is being said, but something is still being felt. Something is still being felt. And in a world where everything moves quickly, those quiet connections become rare. They remind us that behind every screen is a real person, with thoughts and emotions, just as complex as our own. Someone sitting somewhere in the world, living their life, sharing small pieces of themselves, without knowing who might see them, without knowing who might pause and think about them for a moment. That's what happened when I saw your comment. You probably moved on after writing it, But the thought you left behind stayed here for a while, floating quietly in the space between two strangers who may never meet, yet somehow shared a small moment of understanding across the distance between their lives. After that moment, something simple changed in the way I looked at the comment section. Before, it was just a place where words appeared and disappeared quickly, a fast-moving stream of opinions, reactions, and thoughts from people I would probably never meet. But now, every time I scroll through those comments, a small part of me wonders if I might see your name again. Not because I'm searching desperately, just because the possibility exists. It's interesting how one small moment can quietly change our attention. Suddenly, something that used to feel ordinary becomes slightly different. The same screen, the same comments, the same endless flow of voices. Yet now, there's a quiet curiosity in the background. A thought that asks, what if that person writes again? Because sometimes a single message is enough to make you notice someone in a crowd you've never seen before. The internet is full of millions of people speaking at once. Most of them pass by without leaving a trace in our memory. We read their words, maybe smile, maybe agree, maybe disagree, and then we continue scrolling. But once in a while, someone leaves something behind that lingers. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to stay in your thoughts for a little while longer than expected. That's what happened with your comment. And now there's this quiet feeling of anticipation. Not the kind that rushes or demands anything. Just a calm curiosity that sits somewhere in the back of the mind. The idea that maybe, one day while reading through another long list of comments, I might see something familiar again. Your words. Your way of expressing a thought. Your small presence appearing again between thousands of other voices. And if that happens, I imagine I would notice. To fist it immediately. Because once someone stands out from the crowd, even for a brief moment, they're no longer just another stranger passing through. They become someone recognizable in a place where almost everyone is anonymous. Someone whose words you read a little more carefully. Someone whose thoughts you become curious about. It doesn't mean anything dramatic needs to happen. It doesn't mean anything dramatic needs to happen. Sometimes connection is simply about recognition, about knowing that somewhere out there is another person whose voice you've heard once before. Even if it was only through a short message written on a screen, maybe our paths will cross again in the same comment section. Maybe you'll write something completely different next time. Maybe you'll write something completely different. Maybe you'll forget that you ever wrote the first comment at all. Maybe you'll just be speaking your mind again, the way people naturally do when they're not trying to impress anyone. And maybe I'll read it again without you realizing it, that quiet moment repeating itself in a slightly different way. Because life has a strange habit of bringing small moments back around when we least expect them. Sometimes strangers cross paths once and never again. And sometimes they cross paths more than once without even planning it. All it takes is a few words appearing in the right place at the right time. So I continue scrolling the way everyone does. The world still moves quickly. New comments appear every second. New voices join the conversation and disappear just as fast. The crowd remains large, loud, and constantly changing. But somewhere inside that moving crowd, there's a small possibility. The possibility that one day, in the middle of all those passing words, I might suddenly pause again. Because I saw something familiar. Because I saw your comment again. Sometimes the most interesting stories don't begin with a long conversation. They begin with something small. A moment, a sentence. A few words that quietly appear in front of you without warning. That's how this moment began. With a comment. Not a long message. Not something dramatic or complicated. Just a simple thought that somehow carried more meaning than it probably intended to. Something written quickly, maybe without much thought, but somehow it traveled farther than expected. When I first saw your comment, I didn't know it would stay in my mind this long. Usually things on the internet move fast. People write something, someone reads it, and a few seconds later everyone moves on to the next thing. It's an endless flow of voices, opinions, reactions, and emotions all blending together. But sometimes one voice doesn't disappear with the rest. Sometimes it stays. Your comment stayed, not because it demanded attention, but because it carried a kind of quiet sincerity that is rare in places filled with noise. It felt like a moment where someone simply decided to be honest for a second. And honesty has a strange power. It doesn't shout. It doesn't try to impress. It just exists, and when someone notices it, they feel it immediately. That's what happened here. Now, every time I scroll through comments, there's a small thought in the back of my mind. Not something loud or obvious, just a quiet curiosity that appears without effort. I wonder if I'll see your name again. Maybe you'll write another comment under a different video. Maybe you'll share another thought, another small piece of your personality without realizing someone might recognize it. Because once someone notices your voice, it becomes easier to hear it again. Stuff. Even in a crowd, it's like walking through a busy street where thousands of people are talking at the same time. At first, everything sounds like noise. But once you recognize one voice, suddenly you can hear it again even when the crowd grows louder. Your comment felt like that voice. And now, somewhere inside the endless flow of messages, there's a possibility that I might hear it again. Maybe the next comment will be funny. Maybe it will be thoughtful. Maybe it will be completely different from the first one. But that's the interesting part about people. No single sentence can explain who someone truly is. Every person has layers of thoughts, ideas, emotions, and perspectives that reveal themselves slowly over time. Sometimes through conversations, sometimes through actions, and sometimes through something as simple as a comment left behind on the internet. You may never know how your words travel once you press send. You may never know who reads them carefully, who smiles at them, who pauses for a moment because something about those words feels real. Most of the time, comments disappear into the crowd. Lots of the time, comments disappear into the crowd. But once in a while, a comment finds someone who happens to be paying attention, someone who reads it a little more slowly, someone who wonders about the person behind those words. That curiosity doesn't come from fantasy or imagination. It comes from a simple human instinct to understand each other, to notice the small signs that reveal personality, kindness, humor, or depth in the way someone expresses themselves. Your comment had that kind of sign.